This is the fun part. Everything else was warm-up. I hope you're ready. There's a saying in sales that nothing attracts clients like passion. You know, that P word, passion. Well, I got to warn you, there's a lot of passion up here right now with these three folks. So you better brace for impact with your passion meters because you're going to get a good dose of it. But I'm delighted to open this panel on overcoming barriers to dietary change, which is the first of two panels that we'll have. And what we're going to focus on here is really individuals, people. So it sort of builds on the last talk. How do you sort of translate that thought, that desire, or even develop that desire and get it into an action as far as getting people to shift that needle towards more plant-based thinking and foods and health. And the way this panel will work is I'm going to introduce our three illustrious participants, and they're going to say a few words about some of their interest. We'll have some questions for them, and then hopefully a little time for questions from you at the end. And I know you can ask tough questions because you've been doing it all day, so you'll keep that up. All right. So, who I'm going to introduce first, let's see, Marilise is closest to me, and you can read the full description in the program, but Marilise, on your right, is a community chef, organizer, food educator, and enterprise manager at Just Foods. And her work centers on racial equity, food sovereignty, through a decolonizing of your diet. And someday I will be smart enough to understand what all that means. But it sounds really important, I gotta say that. As well as solidarity and cooperative economy lens. She currently works with parents and works on getting better food, particularly in Dominican restaurants as an interest. There is a restaurant that you work with, I guess, is Mama Catalina.
Yeah, that's my parents'
in Queens, named after her paternal grandmother. Mm-hmm. And she also has a BA in International Studies from CCNY and is a native New Yorker, but has roots in the Dominican Republic. So, Marilise, why don't you start by just giving us a few words of your thoughts on this whole, your experience, your perspectives on getting individuals to change and embrace a healthier way of eating and lifestyle.
Yeah, thank you. So my experience, I am a community chef, in other words, like the people's chef. And with my background, I've partnered with different community gardens in New York City, but specifically one in the Bronx called Kelly Street Community Garden. And there, throughout the season, throughout the summer, I would do cooking demonstrations for community members where we harvested the ingredients that were grown in the garden, and we would make a recipe that would be culturally connected to the demographic of the community. So within the work that I have, my background is I really like to make dishes that are culturally relevant to the people that I'm working with. So I've worked a lot with the Spanish-speaking community, the Latinx heritage community, and Afro-Caribbean cuisine is my expertise, I would say, and bringing that Afro-Caribbean cultural dishes and giving it a plant-based spin to it. Or just making dishes that are Afro-Caribbean that's already plant-based. So kind of reminding our people that this is already inherently knowledge that we have within us. So like I am of Dominican descent, and we make okra and we make eggplants, stew eggplants. So it's just telling my people that this is already something that we've done. Let's use the sazon, the flavors, which is red peppers, onions, garlic, and that is the base of whatever it is that you're making. So that's my background, and within the work that I do with Just Food too, we support other people that are interested in being food educators from the community. So it may be, for example, if you have like Somos that works with different health clinics throughout New York City, maybe your patients want to be a food educator, and like Just Food will support people to be able to do that and be educators in their communities, and so that you can see more representation, sharing this knowledge that's already within us. So that's a little bit. I can continue, but I know we have other people on the panel, so.
No, that's perfect. Thank you.
Yes.
So I know you just had lunch and a break, but I don't know what that sazon. I'm ready for more. I don't know about you. Bring on the sazon. We're going to all be going to Queens to the restaurant for dinner after this, I think. Hope they can hold 200 people. Let's move now to our center, Diego Poniman. Diego is the Chief Medical Officer at Somos, that's capital S-O-M-O-S, Community Care. He was born and raised in Buenos Aires, where he also completed medical school, then did his residency in the Bronx at Einstein, and later a fellowship in general internal medicine at Sinai. He's a primary care physician, has a private practice at Metropolis Medical in Upper Manhattan, and he uses nutrition and lifestyle changes as therapy for his patients. He's currently working with the Somos Community Care and underserved communities through local clinics, and he is bringing food oases to the communities with hope to transform these so-called food deserts into healthier neighborhoods. So, Diego, if you would share your thoughts on barriers in your experience.
Thank you, Rich. So, as Rich says, I'm a primary care physician, which is a family doctor, basically, and in a group with Somos, which means we are in Spanish, we're about 2,500 physicians, and we describe ourselves as the neighborhood physicians. We are mostly immigrants. We are mostly Latinos, I have to say. We're in Washington Heights, in Harlem, in the Bronx. We're in Brooklyn as well, in 4 boroughs. And one of the things that we see, and personally I've been doing, I love and I really enjoy, and it's very rewarding to treat patients with food therapy, for basically use food as medicine. But since November, what we got is we got the opportunity to start a bigger program in which we get about 40 patients and we walk them through 10 days of plant-based nutrition. As you know, or you might imagine, our patient population comes usually from Latin America, and usually rural areas, and they get to the United States, they get acculturated, and as they get acculturated, the health starts going down. And they can identify that. They add the cheeseburgers, and they add the pizzas and the cheese, and you can see their health. And what they used to eat in the rural areas was basically rice and beans. And, occasionally, for festivities, for some, they could do meat as well, some fish, but basically their main, and now they come to the United States and they come to my office and they say that the problem is the rice and the problem is the corn, the plain corn. And so we have to, as, Eric, pointed this morning, have to change, their switch, start the hard drive and start to telling them that basically the rice, the better, of course, I tell them to do brown rice and the beans. So that's our job, to start educating again. But we have the luxury of giving them 10 days. Like Dr. Greger says, it's a free sample. We give them 10 days, people start feeling better, it's a miracle, I have to tell you. People tell me that chest pain goes away and diabetes get normalized and everything. And for us, that our goal is to keep patients out of the emergency department. We try, that's what we give appointments, easy access, that's what we have as staff. We want people to get their primary care in the primary care offices with the family doctors and not in the ED. That's our goal. So that this goes perfectly aligned with what we try to do. Thank you.
And our anchor man for the introductions, Omowale Adewale, who I hear completely lacks all passion and enthusiasm for his material, as you'll see in a moment. But Omowale is the author of An Introduction to Veganism and Agricultural Globalism. Don't mess with him. He's a former champion fighter. as well as a research scholar for the Manhattan Research Library Institute. He's certified in plant-based nutrition. He is in production of Brotha, B-R-O-T-H-A, Vegan for Lantern Books, a collection of insightful essays and stories and others for Black vegan men. These are writings by Black vegan men. He's the co-founder of GAME, a not-for-profit that looks at socioeconomic issues among working-class people of color. And he's also the founder of Black Veg Fest, which sounds really cool. I think we'll all have to go.
Thank you.
And of course, Omowale was born right here at SUNY Downstate Medical Center. So it's nice to have you back.
Yeah.
Omowale, your thoughts on barriers to change and successful ways to deal with them?
Oh my goodness. There's so much. Let's try to make this short, right? Okay. So, all right. So I got 5 minutes, I think. So first, and I'm gonna try to keep it really brief. Black Veg Fest, we wanted to address the community's health decline, and also my passion, for animals, and how does that actually work, right? And it's not that the Black community has issues with animals, right? Because sometimes we talk about veganism in such a way, and it's defined as this, this white thing, right? So we kind of demystify a lot of that, and we try to make that clear that people are really suffering from, housing discrimination, just housing access, unemployment, underemployment. So when you have all those things stacked up against you, and in addition to police brutality, I've been stopped by, the police for so long, and I speak to people all the time, and I'm like, I can't believe it. Police haven't stopped me in like a year or so, and it's like so redefining of your life. Like, wow, like this is a little bit of what freedom might feel like. So just feel that, and because it resonates with me, right? So we're dealing with all those issues, and so when we look at the landscape in terms of oppression, and we're talking about food, like people are dealing with this issue, like they don't want to hear about who else is oppressed. You understand? So we try to make them understand that, and that's where intersectionality comes into play, and why it's so significant. So when we do Black Veg Fest, we organize, incredible speakers, the vendors, and we really try to take on all the different issues that are out there, but not by ourselves. We just organize people, and that's what the organizer does, and that's what we, essentially try to do is, so we take the information. And what we want to do is we connect that we get the information from the researchers, and we connect that to the people. Like yesterday, Black Veg Fest went into Brevoort housing for the 3rd time. We're doing monthly conversations with seniors, and so the seniors, they get this information. We talk about hummus and why is folks utilizing hummus, but then also we want to talk about even things in breakfast foods like pancakes. Yesterday, no eggs and no dairy. I love pancakes. So just to be clear, these are things that I know how to cook and and create, and that I love, right? So when I go to the elders yesterday, and the elders are like, yeah, pancakes, I was like surprised. I'm like, oh, I'm gonna have a lot of fun. So they love, blueberry, banana pancakes, go figure, right? With no eggs and no dairy, and it tastes the same as if they would get it from somewhere else. And we make it palatable, the information palatable, but also the resources, the recipes, and everything easy. If we have to go right to the door, that's what we do. That's what community organizers essentially do, and I think that's what folks up here, do. I think this is what this panel is about, and we want to connect you, folks who are the professionals, also the attendees, how to actually engage, how to be a part of this, but also how to take your expertise and connect it to the people who need it. That's the true strength of the organizer, and that we do this work, with no accolades. We do this work. Like yesterday, I had to go to the grocery store, and I was, and the best conversation that I had was, that it was 2 elders in there that were, getting ready to, to meet me for this conversation yesterday, and they said, oh, that's him. It's like, oh, awesome. Your vegan chef is essentially, your celebrity in the community. So that's a good feeling. I don't know, maybe it's not working. But it said I had a minute. So he did forewarn everyone. So thank you very much. My name is Omawale.
It's that lack of passion gets them every time. Second time I heard the word intersectionality today. It's really sinking in. All right, now we got some tough questions for the panelists. We're going to spare no mercy here at all. So, Marilis, you are first. And the question is, see, they're all waiting. You know, like, what's the question going to be? You know, get the question out. So, how can people get whole foods, fresh fruits, vegetables, and other things in communities where it might not be so easy to get them, and it might be easier to go to your local Popeyes or Church's or McDonald's or some healthy food stop like that? Your thoughts. Not that that would represent Central Brooklyn at all or the other boroughs, but if it did, go ahead.
Yeah, so this is a really great question. I know that for many people that do research will call certain communities that don't have access to nutritious and affordable fresh foods as food deserts. And I usually prefer to use the term food apartheid to describe really what it is that people that live in communities that lack that access to nutritious and affordable fresh foods. And this term is a term that I've heard food advocates like Karen Washington, as well as Leah Penniman, who is a mentor to me. They've used this term, food apartheid. And food apartheid, what that means is it makes it clear that this is a human-created system of segregation when it comes to food access. That this is something that is not by accident, I feel like most of you would know that, why is it that certain communities, particularly communities of color, you'll see have a higher rates of obesity, high cholesterol, and that is not something that is by accident. You'll see that in white neighborhoods, they have 4 times more supermarkets than in black or POC communities, communities of color. So that's just to say, like, this is something that is human created, and to say food desert, it also says that you don't have access to food. And there are these communities, the communities that I'm also a part of is like we do have a supermarket, we do have some access. So acknowledging that it's not completely a food desert. It's food apartheid. So I would say ways to bring in access to whole foods, to fresh, nutritious foods that are culturally relevant is, well, one of those ways is, so here in Brooklyn, for example, the Brooklyn Movement Center and amongst other organizations are working towards getting a food co-op, similar to Park Slope Food Co-op. So that is something that is in the works right now, and that is a way of like having community members come together and have a cooperatively, like a co-op-led food cooperative where you can source your ingredients and then have it be sourced partnering with local farmers and local gardeners to be able to source those ingredients. So that's like one example that's happening right now as a way to address wanting to bring access to whole foods and nutritious fresh foods in the neighborhood. That is happening in the moment. Also, being able to have jobs is a way. So like community chefs, I feel like are really paving a way where it's like we are doing the food education in our communities on the grounds, and we are also being able to make money as well by organizations partnering with organizations. So like I've also previously, I was part of Woke Foods. I was one of the worker owners of Woke Foods, and Woke Foods is a Afro-Caribbean, Afro-Dominican worker-owned cooperative where it's using culturally relevant foods and being able to do catering and also being able to do cooking classes. And then you can maybe charge, like through catering, you'll make some money coming in. So having people in the community also feel empowered to start their own businesses, to feel empowered that the knowledge that you have of cooking, that is knowledge that you can build up upon, and maybe also do food education, partner with organizations. When I was part of Woke Foods, we had the opportunity to partner with an organization called Chashama that works with artists, and they considered, we are culinary artists, community chefs, and they hired us to do demos inside the buildings, apartment buildings, and we would do demos in the lobby. So that's just like a way also to bringing access to our people. And then I'll do a shout out also to like Community Chef's Kitchen, which is a co-op that's also starting out for community chefs. And they work with schools, they work with organizations like Riseboro that are doing bilingual programming, cooking classes for people to also have access to this knowledge and access to just because community chefs also bring that knowledge of where can you source your ingredients and be as guide you through this process. So those are just some ways, tangible ways that people can bring in access to whole foods, plant-based lifestyle in a tangible way. So that's just a few. I'm sure that my colleagues will share other things as well.
Well, actually, your colleagues don't have time to share anything now, but
What I
just
wanted
so you don't
to
think I'm being mean, we had a conference call, and I told them exactly how much time they had, all right? So I'm not a meanie.
No,
I'm
he's
not a
not.
meanie.
We just
There
like
was
to
going to
talk
be a
lot.
1 minute thing after each, but we're going to hold off on
what
that
I
for time.
what I wanted to add is that there's a myth out there that the only way to eat healthy
No,
is eating.
we don't have time to do
Okay, just
feedback on this now. We'll fit it in later.
Okay.
But I really want to make sure we get to the questions for you guys, and you can contemplate food apartheid and intersectionality and all those things as we hear from. We're going to mix it up a little bit, Omawali. So the question for you, Omawali, is what particular barriers are there for African American Black individuals who want to add more plant foods to their diet?
Awesome. Great question. Well, first, let's understand that when we talk about information and that's coming out, whether we talk about in schools or we're talking about in communities where folks work, a lot of times we don't have access to that type of information. A lot of times we don't have that in school. If we talk about our schools right now, like people just don't listen, right? If we say that particular foods that are not healthy within schools, we have to create an organization, Coalition for Healthy Schools, right? In order to make that happen in poor communities, and we have to, because I participated, as a speaker or presenter at these different schools, and they really just don't listen a lot of times, and it's the same time, and I guess it's a great place, so sometimes you go to the medical office, and what happens? Your doctor might not actually listen, to you. And sometimes, and very often in our community, we're not listened to, whether we talk about even in terms of work. So it's really it has to be a bottom up. It's not going to be just specific to foods. It's everything. We're not being listened to. For instance, we could be talking about issues with the police, and something could be happening on the road. Oh, I just had a roadside emergency in a situation, and then a person would be killed. Not listening. It's different examples. I lived in the Bronx for 10 years, and it was just awful in terms of, the food apartheid, Amaryllis had said, because I was being vegetarian for the entire time, I could not find anything. What you had at 161 in Grand Concourse in that area, you had Yankee Stadium over there, you have you have Borough Hall over there, Bronx Borough Hall, you have Supreme Court, you have Family Court, you have Bronx, Criminal Court, you have all these different agencies, municipalities around there, and nothing but fast food, the most horrible access, to resources. So I would ask when I would go to certain stores, bodegas, corner stores all the time, hey, is there any plant milks, any rice milk or almond milk? I'm talking about like 15 years ago. I'm talking about even, 20 years ago. I hope it's, improved. I'm back in Brooklyn. And I would ask and speak to the manager, and they would totally ignore. What happened now? Now that's changed. Why? Because of gentrification. Not listening to the community, just stepping out of the way. Sometimes all we really need, in the black community, communities of color, is just like, can we have the same access? Right. Just kind of step out of the way and allow us to kind of, just grow. If you just get out of the way sometimes, like, people can really grow. There's not like special access, and people think that we're asking for that. Like with Black Veg Fest, there were businesses that, I'm a rapper right now, there were businesses that thrived, that made thousands that day because the black community, depended upon itself. And then they did very well, and they will, and continue to excel as we talk about real issues and we discuss race, inside of our food, and we discuss, different cultures within our food. Once we do that and we have a conversation and we sit down and we talk about what's available and what's the resource and we start listening, then we can make like drastic changes. That's been shown.
Thanks. Yeah, that's what we want, the drastic changes. And I think we'll move now to Diego. And the question for Diego, we saved you for last because it's the toughest question, is, for people who want to go plant-based, how do you ensure it's healthy? As someone said before, you could eat white bread, jelly, and I guess an Oreo cookie sandwich and call it plant-based, diet, but it's not. How do you get the good carbs, the whole food, stay away from the junk, and particularly in low-income and Latino, underserved areas?
Yeah, and I think I found that's the most difficult. In the 80s, I remember when people started, because again, they were saying that these zones, then they became in the 90s the blue zones, but even before, they realized that places in the world where people mostly live on carbs, they were the healthier populations. 80% carbs, the Okinawans, 80% sweet potatoes, the Okinawans. So they said less fat and more carbs, and people started doing refined carbs. Carbs that they were taking the nutrients, the fiber, and what I tell my patients, because years ago we didn't have the possibility of being in front of a computer, we had to bring, things to show, flyers. Now I get in my computer and I put pastry, and I just Google images, boom. And then you cannot try later, pastry, and you can get tons. Then my patients say, I get it now. That's what I shouldn't eat. So again, carbs mean, unrefined, complex carbs that are not being processed. So again, quinoa, rice, camus, corn, but not cornmeal, because cornmeal is great, but then you have to add the milk, the fat, the butter. So again, that's my daily fight. They come even from the endocrinologist saying that they should limit the amount of rice and the amount of corn. And I become really, frustrated because the idea is to do grains, but I tell them just like they grow from the garden, and then you can peel it or cook it, and that's fine. That doesn't mean French fries. That doesn't mean, again, the cereal that you can get in the store. So people, they get it, and again, when you put them on this immersion programs, 10 days, and the only thing you give them is unprocessed food. You give them whole grains for 10 days, fruits, vegetables, and legumes. And they see their biomarkers. They see they lose like 6 to 10 pounds. They see that their chest pain, again, goes away. They see that they start breathing. They can take out the oxygen. I mean, again, a miracle. I've never seen anything like that. Then they start believing. But again, education, and we, as physicians, need to get, again, remember, everybody knows that we get such very limited amount of nutrition classes, nutrition education in medical school, almost none, zero. So, but now the fact that here I've heard there are students, so that's great. Now, Michelle McMadden giving lectures, and Dr. Oswald as well in Montefiore. That's changing. So that's great. So the future generations, they're going to be better, I think.
Diego, can you also just comment on the Latino community in particular? I know when I travel, if I go to Puerto Rico or Mexico, there's a lot of gorditos down there. There's a lot of people gaining weight. It's really more of an even epidemic than the U.S., if that's possible. You know, there's only so much dulce de leche you can eat and stay, you know, a certain size. So what are the challenges in those communities?
The challenge is the more they adopt the standard American diet, the farther they go away from the foods that their grandmother used to cook. I mean, the worse you can see, and that's something that we always, you know, the fact that there's something called the Latino Paradox. You know, the Latino Paradox talks about even the worst socioeconomic, you know, numbers for Latinos in the U.S., if you compare mortality with our group, they don't do bad. Now, this is for the generations that migrate. First, they thought it was only healthy Latinos come to the U.S. No, that's not true. Then they thought the Latinos go to die in Dominica. That's not true. They die here as well. Is that there's something in the food. It's the beans. It's the music. It's all the things that, you know, the social support. Now, the newer generation are losing that Latino paradox. So that's very sad. You see, the newer generation is the first one. Everybody knows that they're going to live less than their parents. This is new. So I think that it's the acculturation that is killing us here in this country.
Thank you. So I'd like to give our panelists the opportunity to comment on anything their co-panelists said. So Marilis, you have a minute or two of thoughts on what Diego or Omowale just said.
Yeah, so I want to speak a little bit about what Diego was just talking about within the Latinx community. And I know, Richard, you had mentioned about, like, in Puerto Rico, you'll see a lot of people that are heavier. And like, I can just speak up about Puerto Rico specifically, is that in Puerto Rico, there's such a high rate of processed foods that is available to the people, and a lot of fast food restaurants. And you think about it, it's like they're in the Caribbean, you know, you can grow so much. So there are people now that are people that have been growing food, and there are more people that are after Hurricane Maria that are really trying to reclaim this skill of being able to grow your own food, because that is something that is influencing why people are getting sicker, like in places like in Puerto Rico, and that is something that needs to be addressed, getting people to reconnect with the land and people to be able to reconnect and be part of that process of growing your foods, because then you can decrease those mortality rates and those diet-related conditions. So yeah, wanted to add that.
Need some rooftop gardens in Brooklyn, and got to get it going. Rooftop gardens. And, yeah, the more people connect with what food really is, absolutely. Omowale, your thoughts?
Yes, well, we were talking about increasing access or better access, and Mary Lise was speaking to some things. I would also would like to add, and I know she had brought up gardens, right? And just being able to create your own as much as you possibly can. Just having better innovative models to basically model after, and in terms of creating our own types of food. Our own types of, access to food. We had to create that. In order to go into Brevoort housing, no one tapped us on the shoulder. You know, we wanted to contact them and find out that would they be receptive to, a plant-based or vegan, message. And of course they are. And you just have to be consistent, with that message. I think kind of the messaging, today and some of the panels is that, veganism is bad. But like the thing about, education is a consistent model. Like we don't want to do Black Veg Fest, have one event and then that's it. Like, that's the problem. I do a lot of different Veg Fests, and it's like, you might hear something, I might say something, or another educator might say something, and you'll forget it, right? It happens all the time. But if it's consistent, if it's also institutionalized, then we do a lot better with that. But I think we have to begin, creating and kind of, moving outside of the box.
Thank you. Diego, you get the last word here. I know you were going to say something about Miralisa's ideas.
Yeah, so, I mean, the myth I was going to say about whole food, a patient of mine calls whole check, because the whole check goes when they go to whole food. But the idea is that we do, part of the things that we do on this Jumpstart, on this immersion program, we do tours to different, and I have to tell you that any supermarket has, and I was once trying to discuss how to cook beans with my Dominican, and they almost, kill me, because they know how to, they don't do the can, they just do the beans. The problem is how the sazon and the oil, if you say to limit or try to avoid cook, they don't know that you can cook with broth, with water. Right. Those are the things, small steps that I think you were saying. But again, they have it. They know that they've been raised on rice and beans. So you don't have to teach a Dominican how to eat, rice and beans.
Yeah.
All right, I have to give all of our folks credit. They've been very timely. So we have time for questions. So if you have a question, raise your hand. We'll get you a mic. And there's someone over here on the left, someone in the middle of the center.
Good afternoon. I'm Gail Stanback. I'm a DRPH student. I've just completed my dissertation on the culture of diabetes and the Black church, and working with motivational interviewing. After sitting down with the focus group that I worked with my research, I found that there is not a lot of access to fresh foods. And I just wanted to point out that when I was educated here in the public school system in Brooklyn back in the 60s and the 70s, even though I'm dating myself, that I received home economics in school. I learned how to cook and do all of those things. A lot of the people today are not cooking, and they're relying on restaurants and other people to cook their foods, and that's where the danger comes in. And also, I just wanted to point out, is my grandparents had a farm back in North Carolina where they grew their own vegetables, their own chickens, and they did everything else. And a lot of the laws restricted those people who owned those properties to farm their own foods and grow their own vegetables. So those are the type of things that have created this issue. And I don't think that African Americans are against plant-based foods. I think African Americans cannot access plant-based foods, and they've been taught not to cook and rely on processed foods. I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Marilise, I think that plays into the food apartheid concept. So do you have any few seconds of thoughts on that? Or?
No, that's definitely, thank you for sharing, Gail. And yeah, that it's a systematic issue, right? Like that Black farmers have been stripped away from their land. Like that is something that within this book that Leah Penniman wrote, Farming While Black, she talks about that there are many, like the connection that Black Americans have when it comes to the land, African Americans specifically. It's like something that is there's so much inherited trauma in there that needs to be, a lot of healing that needs to be done. So it is something that, the fact that Black folks don't have access to land here as well to grow your own foods, that does create that level of barrier for us to be able to live healthier lives and not be at risk of all these like diet-related conditions.
Thank you. Who has the mic for the next question?
Hi, Afia Bediako. I work for the New York City in the Employee Wellness Program with a lens on food, and also I have a lot of passion about this too, specifically around community food. And you spoke a while about innovating, and I think that sometimes we have to replicate, because we've done this, we can do this, and it's not just innovating, it's replicating. But my question, rice and beans got me started on it, and I wanted to ask, and the conversation about land and this history and this problems, and maybe immigrants and maybe even people in this country, there's a disconnection with some of these kinds of foods because there's a poor people food association. So the KFC that's in Puerto Rico, that might be contributing to overweight as opposed to the rice and beans. Rice and beans also, just rice and beans, which is plant-based and with a vegetable, a healthy meal, a complete protein there. But there's a disassociation because some people think of this as poor people's food. And I just want you to speak about that, because we're living this standard American diet, specifically for immigrants, this dream that's killing us and has been. So just kind of want to speak on that disassociation.
Wally, can you respond to that, please?
Yeah. Well, I definitely feel, I agree, 100%, that I think what we tend to do is, there's this misconception that veganism is kind of like first world, but like rice, beans, and, a lot of the greens, a lot cheaper, than meat. And also, you could find that out by going to these so-called third world countries and see what the food that they have to rely on, that it's not meat. Like they'll eat meat at a ceremony, a festival or something like that. They'll be, happy to, finally get access to meat. But, we're eating, that plant-based food. They're eating that plant-based food on a consistent basis. And our community just really, you're right. I think the innovative methods are more in organizing and attracting people. But you're right. It is something that we have right now. We just constantly, have to, tap into and wake up.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I think there's someone in the back. Yes.
Hi, my name is Donna. I am a community health education major at York College. And one of the things that we had to do a research for, and it came up about accessibility to foods. And one of the things that I never knew about is that the New York Department of Health has an initiative that says NYC Green Cards. And for anyone who is familiar with those green cards, you know exactly which neighborhoods they're in. They're supposed to be in the neighborhood that don't have access to foods and stuff. So what can you guys, how can we get the green cards in our neighborhood? Because I remember working in Manhattan, Upper East Side Manhattan, and that is where I saw them. I didn't see them in my neighborhood. I live in Bedford-Stuyvesant now. There's one on North Shore and Fulton. That's the only one that's in Bed-Stuy right now. So I just want to know, if any of you can answer, how can we get the green cards more accessible to our people in our neighborhood?
Well, Diego, or if someone else has particular
my only
expertise?
comment that I can do is that I remember before I started, this project, we used to have it in the drawer, and we were not giving it, at least, in the neighborhoods that we were. So many times they're there, and people just don't take advantage. So a lot of resources, the Bronx, Manhattan, they have, markets, there's great, but I don't think we are using, I agree, to me, it's not that people actually don't know these resources. That's my, at least in my clinic, that's how I see it.
If I may, I think it is, he hit it right on the head. We just don't know about it. I happen to know about it because I was working with Green Market, right? And in the Bronx, where there's a less access, to fresh produce more than any other borough. And so when I, got back to Brooklyn, I was not hearing about green cards at all. So that's the first thing, but then I think people will assume that maybe some of these communities don't want to operate a green card because you have to be in those communities as well. Mm-hmm. So there are some prerequisites as well, but I don't think that the information is getting out there to the people. I think that we have to be careful that when we see commercials and stuff like that at KFC, McDonald's, and Burger King, we don't think that anybody's trying to beat us over the head, but somebody talk to you about rice and beans and veganism, people be like, oh my God, I can't believe it. You just saw 100,000 commercials already, today. You see billboards, that's more money. And if you just compare the dollars, how many dollars are we putting into, just the access to information about fruits and vegetables and what we can do? And then how much are, these fast food establishments, putting in, the McDonald's alone is like $1 billion. And then I think the government, last time I heard, was less than $2 million in terms of access to fruits and vegetables.
All right, we have time for one last quick question. Monica?
My last quick question after a comment. First, I thank the panel for all that I heard. I missed a little bit of Chef Adewale's comments in the beginning. But has anybody made the link between all the social conditions that people experience that drives them to food? I mean, we even have the language, comfort food. Mm-hmm. And we know that when people are upset and depressed and sometimes broke and don't have money for the foods that you spend a lot of money for that are the healthiest. So have we made the dotted lines to all of the reasons that people eat, including starting with being upset and anxious and depressed, and a lot of that coming from racism? You did use the word apartheid. I appreciated that. So could you just draw some lines to why people eat? Today we ate because the food was delicious, but there are other times when people eat and drink and smoke and use drugs for other reasons, and we need to try and connect that intersectionality so that we can understand how we need to approach this from a lot of different angles.
So I'm going to ask Marylise, because she's a chef, an organizer, an educator, and has lots of intersectionality. So
I mean, we can maybe co-answer this one.
Okay, yeah, just we need to be brief now and tie it up.
I'll go very fast, and I want to give you a little bit of hope. I cannot talk, we don't have time to talk about emotional eating, but what I can tell you is that Dr. Esselstyn says, usually in his talks, we need to change good food that we like, which we know we like it, all the junk food and its comfort, to food that we can eat, and it's also, so the starch, the number one reason for people failing plant-based, they want to eat, doctor, I'm doing perfectly fine. It's the third day on green salads. You're not going to sustain. You're unable to sustain. So if you don't add your corn, your potatoes, your rice, that's to me is comfort food. So change one comfort food for another. That's my take.
Yeah, I'll add to that too that when it comes to, for example, sugar, there has been studies that say that sugar is just as addicting as cocaine. It's a real thing, like processed sugars, refined sugars. You do have like this desire to want to eat more and more and more. So I think it's also like sharing that knowledge with our people, with our communities. I mean, sharing it is one thing, but also letting them know, like, this is really, it is detrimental to our health. It is causing so much harm, sugar. So I think it's also acknowledging that and looking for natural, like, alternatives to that. Let's have a fruit. Like, if you have that sugar craving, because that's very common. You're like, oh, I'm craving something sweet. All right, let's maybe eat dates, or maybe have some dried fruits, or have an apple. Like, find these other substitutes that can help with that sugar craving. Yeah, sometimes you may want to have a cookie, but I think it's also in moderation is what's really important. And just kind of reminding yourself psychologically, like, okay, I want this, but is this really good for me right now? So it's a lot of like mental work that you need when it comes to food, that you have this, like, psychologically, it's like every time I'm angry, I have a bag of chips, but it's like, all right, maybe I should take a walk. Like, just kind of reflecting on that and of what it, and what I know people that have shared, like maybe having a diary, and like, some community chefs are talking of incorporating that in their programming, of like just writing things that you eat and how do you feel when you eat these things. So
thanks. So to tie it up, I would ask you to, if you go to our website, that's downstate.edu/plant-based, there is a section on the upper left that says a beginner's guide to plant-based nutrition. And you will find in the back of that guide a list of about 50 green markets and places you can access fresh food in Brooklyn. It's a very comprehensive list, so look there. I really want to thank our three panelists, who, as you can see, are completely passionless, but they did a good job pretending, and some great insights, wisdom, knowledge. Omawale has apparently the final word, so go ahead.
Really quickly, we're going to have Black Veg Fest Co-op City, April 13th. The community had called on us, and we already had to expand that space. So if people are interested in going to Co-op City, where it's kind of landlocked and away from other neighborhoods and access to the resources, we're going to come and bring folks who have that information, who have the resources.
Sounds
April
good.
13th. Go to blackvegfest.org. It's
We'll all
free.
gather there.
It's free.
Thank you. Thank you to our panelists. And I will invite up Rachel Atchison from our Brooklyn Borough President's Office to be the anchor session.